Hello and welcome back to the Great Lakes Disc YouTube channel, or maybe your favorite podcast streaming. I'm Brian Papa Will Frawley, and I've got a very special guest today. One of my favorite people in the disc golf industry, Seth Fendley from Latitude 64, is nice enough to join us today. Seth is the brand manager and team manager in the United States here for Lat 64, and he's going to tell you all about his role within the industry. We'd love to thank him for this. So make sure you give it a like, a subscribe, a share, whatever you need to do to show Seth some love. That was tough to say. Anyways, here comes Seth. Hello and welcome back. Here is Seth, not quite in the flesh, but in the screen or in your ear, depending on how you look at it. Welcome back to the YouTube channel, Seth. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor. Nice shirt. To have you here. It's great. This is my first forte into an industry related interview for our wonderful YouTube page. I appreciate you jumping on and being our first victim or our first guest, however you want to word that.
Yeah, I'm honored either way. We'll just keep the pun going.
Why not? Why not? So, Seth, why don't you give us your disc golf origin story, if you will? How did you get involved, and then how did you get to where you are today? I guess.
Yeah, so in when I was 15 years old, there was an adult in my life that was looking to just provide an activity for a bunch of teenagers to do on the weekends. And he was someone who was a very close friend of the family and roped my entire friend group into going out and introducing us to disc golf. And so I was gifted my first disc for my 16th birthday. And
What
then
was
they
it?
sat in
What was
my
it?
what was that? What
What
were
was it?
they? So yes, yeah. So San Marino double ring AVR that
Ooh.
is still on my wall today. I used as my main putting putter until the judge came out in 2013. And it's probably would have been worth a lot of money if I'd never used it. But used it for a while. And then a Cobra, a Pro D Cobra. And so two great starter discs for someone starting back in 2006, so started or was given disc, put them in my dresser, got to college, and I found a whole nother group that did the same thing. They went out on Sundays after lunch and played doubles. And that was really what got me into the sport. I was going to school at Arkansas Tech University in Russellville, Arkansas, and I can't shout out enough. There is a surprisingly large amount of people in the disc golf industry that have come out of Russellville, Arkansas, and I'm definitely one of those products. And so that was my start to playing. In the industry itself, I started out with the Disc Golf Pro Tour, and so in 2017, so let's take a small step back. In 2016, the Disc Golf Pro Tour came onto the scene, and the Disc Golf Pro Tour was basically ran by Steve Dodge and a bunch of other people who said they'd help him. And one of those groups of people was UDisc. And as they were going through the first events, Steve had basically been doing social media himself, but he was also the tour director, generally the only person working for the tour because it was a startup. And so he just didn't have time to post a lot on social media. So UDisc said, hey, we're already creating the graphics for the live broadcast. We're already compiling all these stats. At least let us post leaderboards and do a little bit of social media to help get things out there. And so they did that for 2016. And after the first two events of 2017, they came to Steve and they said, hey, Steve, like, it's probably time that you try to find someone to at least do social media. They don't have to be on the ground. We've proven that they can be from home. And so Steve posted right after the Jonesboro Open, Steve posted a call because there was a break from the Jonesboro Open in April until the Utah Open at the end of May. It was NT events in between those Pro Tour events. And Steve posted a call. He said, I'm looking for someone to volunteer to post social media, post from home, ideally someone who already watched the live broadcast, is invested, just wants to help get the word out there. And I saw that at 10 p.m. at night as I was in my bed, getting ready to go to sleep. I was scrolling, and at the time, I was actually a PhD student. So I was working on my doctorate in communication, and I knew that with how busy I was, if I didn't apply then, I wouldn't end up doing it. And so I got out of bed between 10:30 and 11:30. I put together a very simple resume for social media. If you know anything about academia, your academic resume, it's not even a resume, it's called a curriculum vitae, a CV. And your CV looks nothing like a professional resume. And so I had to do a lot of work, but at the time, to supplement my income, I was a project manager for a marketing agency. So I was actively managing social media for about 8 different clients. And so in my mind, adding another client, the Disc Golf Pro Tour, on a volunteer basis, one, looked really good on my CV, but also was a way to keep me engaged. And so I submitted the application. About a week later, Steve calls me. He says, "Hey, so we took resumes for a while. Only one other person submitted, and you're actually qualified for this, like probably overqualified. So it's yours if you're actually up to doing this." And after some conversations, we agreed. And my first event, sort of working for the Pro Tour, was the Utah Open. And so the Utah Open I did from home. That was famously the year that Ricky Wysocki won in a with his throw off, like walk off ace, whatever you want to call it. And it was a moment that I completely missed on the live broadcast because I was prepping the social media post to announce his winning. And so I have it on in the background, but I'm working on the social media graphic. Completely missed it. One of those things where when we get to or I could tell stories all day, but my story of how I experienced the holy shot whenever James Conrad threw in at Worlds, also in Utah, consequently, was a completely different viewing experience for me. But that was sort of what set the pace. And so back in 2017, the tour was shared, or the professional experience was shared between 2 tours, the national tour and the pro tour. And after the Utah Open, there was actually another large break, and that break lasted until Ledgestone. And so my next event, after May, was Ledgestone, which was the week before classes started in for my PhD. And so I found some other friends who were going to Ledgestone. We hopped in a car and we drove up to Peoria so that I could experience a Pro Tour event on the ground. I told Steve I think it would be very important to see what it would be like to be on the ground and be able to post more updates than just what I'm pulling from live coverage. And so I get there, and we're on day 3. We're on hole 8 at Lake Eureka. Steve looks over at me and he goes, "You should be at all of these, shouldn't you?" And I looked at him and said, "I'm a volunteer, and I drove here with my own gas money. Thankfully, you found a house for us to stay in. But if I'm going to go places, you're going to have to cover the expenses." And he goes, "We'll see what we can do." That year, Idlewild was a first-year event on tour, so I did that one from home as well. Didn't go to it, but Steve and the tour paid my expenses to go to Maple Hill and GMC, and at GMC, the Zuka cart right here, which only happened by happenstance. This is not my normal video setup, but the Zuka cart was gifted to me. Steve said, "Hey, I know I didn't pay you this year, but I can at least give you this. And more importantly, if you want to do this in 2018, I feel like I have to pay you." And so then I became the first employee of the Pro Tour. So I was the first W-2 employee of the Pro Tour. Steve and I then proceeded to do a hiring process for an operations coordinator that off season that resulted in us hiring Patrick Graziani, who now works for the PDGA. And that became our group of three for 2018. And then there's a whole lot more stories between now and then, but that's really sort of my start in the industry.
That's awesome, man, and I love the fact that we got to see the cart too. I think that's really cool that Steve did that, and as one of the early adapters to the Disc Golf Pro Tour and its social media, I'm sorry for the years of harassment while you worked for them. So, you're working the pro tour, you're having a good time, you're a PhD student, you're doing all the fun things. How did the Lat 64 thing come about?
Yeah, so in between all of that, just as another side note, everything, or not necessarily everything, but a lot of things seem to happen at Ledgestone. In 2018, it became clear that the tour wasn't quite ready to have me full time. And we're at Ledgestone again, and I get an email from the University of Central Florida that said, "Hey, our debate coach just quit. Could you start next week?" And yet again, another 10 p.m. email. Steve and I actually are working at the dinner table of our host. And I look at Steve and said, "Steve, this just like set us up to where I can do this for another year. Like this is perfect." And so I ended up working as a college professor from 2018 until 2021. And so in 2021, the Pro Tour asked me to go full time. We made the decision, I think rightfully so, in 2020 not to make that happen, only because we were looking to expand and we wanted to hire more people. And because I had a full-time job that gave me the flexibility to do what I was doing, um, we decided that it was okay, basically, for me to work an obscene amount of hours and only be compensated for half of those. But all of that to say, I went full time in 2021. At this point, with the transition from Steve Dodge leading the tour to Jeff Spring leading the tour, I had transitioned into a role of operations and then ultimately vice president of finance and administration. And on top of that, because of my operations background, I was still going to basically every event on tour to help make sure that the events were running as we expected. And so it was a lot of juggling to do all of the office work, the back end office work for the tour, but also do all of the operations work. And it really got to a point during the summer of 2022 where I started to sort of question if like that level of work was something that I wanted to do. And earlier in the off season of that year, I had had a meeting, had dinner with the CEO and owner, one of the founders of Latitude 64, and really enjoyed the conversation that I had with him. For people that don't know Brian and I have lots of really tough conversations about the industry. And it was the same sort of experience that I had with David Berglund. The first thing that David said to me the first time that we talked after I expressed interest in the summer of 2022 was, after our dinner conversation, I thought you would never want to talk to me again. And to which I told him, no, that conversation's the exact reason why I'm talking to you. It shows how much you care about the sport, and it's what drives me to be interested in working for Latitude. And so through all of that, I think that one of the things that's been very interesting about my role in particular is that I'm first off the only person in the United States representing Latitude 64. So that in and of itself creates some unique conundrums. But more importantly, the House of Disc organization is going through so much transition with the acquisitions that it's made that it means that I take on a lot of special projects. It means that I am not always doing one thing. And all of that to say, I was pitched the idea of, hey, we want to start something in the United States. And it sounded like a really good opportunity to be at the forefront of sort of a new era of disc golf. And so that coupled with the idea of hopefully working less was what sort of drew me to Latitude in the first place.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I came from a nonprofit background. I spent way too much time working. Shay gave me this opportunity, and even though I still work way more than 40 hours a week, I see my family way more, and it's awesome. So I totally get that aspect of that work-life balance. As a side note, before we move on to more fun questions, like, do you feel like you disc golf enough? Like actually play?
So you're asking me this question at a really wrong time. Only because I didn't get home until almost 11 o'clock last night because I played Glow League.
Ooh,
And that's because Albert Tom roped me into it. And on top of that, I just came back from a training camp and conference where we played disc golf almost every day for a week. I did, after experiencing that last year, I did take a vacation immediately afterwards. But so far in 2024, and this was the same case last year, according to UDisc, I've played my most disc golf that I will play in the year in January. And
that
so in that regard, yes, but also like my wife got called into work this weekend, and I told her I'm probably going to go play a tournament if she's not going to be around. So I disc golf. I actually disc golf less than I did when I worked for the tour because one of the early goals, this was really thanks to Patrick Graziani more than anything. Patrick said, I don't care what I do or how hard I work, I'm always going to play the course. And so we sort of instilled that in the ethos of the Pro Tour.
nice.
And on Wednesdays or Thursdays, it's not uncommon to find every Pro Tour employee that's at an event either playing the tournament course or playing one of the courses in town. And so when I was at events, I was playing at least once a week. Now I don't play as often because sadly where I live, my closest course is 30 minutes away from me. So
Mm.
it's a full hour investment to go play, but it's at a really quality course, so I don't feel like I'm missing out when I go play it. But yeah.
Yeah, well, you live in Florida and I live in West Michigan, and I have 2.5 feet of snow and you don't. So I'm jealous. But as we transition, you got into a little bit about what you're the only Lat employee in the great United States right now. What does your day-to-day look like, or what does it look like when people come over, within your role of team manager or brand manager? Like how do you handle everything?
Yeah, so thankfully, a lot of the work in the United States is handled through Dynamic Disk and Emporia. And so, really, what it means for me to do what I'm doing, sorry, um, is that noise coming through?
No,
I'm like
we
pausing.
can
We might have to
we
restart.
that's okay.
We can we can restart this question. One of my cats is messing with something behind me. So
Yeah, your cats have been coming in and out, and it's been awesome for me as an ADHD person to watch them come in and out. Zach, don't cut this. This is great material.
okay, so on the day to day, it's a lot of so the way that my day works, I work from 7 to 4, and I work from 7 to 4 Eastern time because that means I start my day at 1 p.m. in Sweden when everyone is coming back from lunch. And so it gives me a great amount of time with them in the office. So they're in the office on average from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern time. And that gives me a solid time block. And sometimes I can even get them through 11 to get work done with people in Sweden. And so what I do is I try to prioritize my mornings for working with Sweden, and then my afternoons for working with Kansas and or any task that I need to get done. So it's not uncommon, especially because players don't have a normal schedule, for me to even still meet with my players who are in Europe in the afternoons US time because they're down to meet at 8 p.m. their time. And so that's how my time is split between like the US and Sweden. as far as like what my work is, currently I've shifted more into a team manager role than as much of a US brand manager role. But my position falls within the marketing department. So I spend a lot of time working with the marketing team in Sweden, but then also working with everyone in Kansas to make sure that they're aligned with upcoming releases and and they have all the materials they need for those releases. And then more importantly, on sort of the brand manager side, that we have the right Latitude product in stock in the United States. And if we're missing stuff, working on figuring out how to remedy that situation.
Yeah, I mean that's got to be a lot to manage when it's not like you can just go down the road and say, "Hey, can you make 1,000 discs?" There's a lot to get it over here and get it organized and all that stuff. So, you mentioned that your team manager role. That's kind of where you're headed to most. And you and I talk a lot, as you alluded to this earlier this off season. You opened up the Latitude 64 application process across the world, if you will, and you got in thousands of requests to be on Team Latitude 64. Talk to me about like what your process was kind of whittling them down, and then specifically if you can touch on what it took for you to look at AMs.
Yeah, so I go through sort of the whole process. Originally, and I can't even speak, I guess, to the original origins because it was way before my time. But one of the things that both Latitude and Dynamic identified was that there's a lot of people out there that we may just not be aware of because either we're not in the same region or they're not outspoken, those sorts of things. And so they created a standing application process that existed on both of their websites. In 2022, as I was coming on board, one of the discussions that I had with the guys in at Dynamic, only because I took over a role as team manager that had not been filled since the pandemic. And so if you can imagine, in one way or another, there was no direct oversight from Sweden, or no specific person, I should say, from Sweden
Yeah,
that oversaw the team for almost 3 years. What that also meant was there was an open application that people had just been filling out and hadn't really been getting responses from. And so I looked through and saw like the number of responses. I knew how long it had been since they had responded to people, how many had come in. And I emailed the guys at Dynamic and I said, "Hey, are you guys getting the same number of applications as we do on a monthly basis? And if so, how on earth do you manage getting back to everybody?" And they said, "Yeah, we're changing this for next year because we try to do it quarterly. And even when we do it quarterly, we have to block off 2 days of the quarter just to review and get back to everyone. And so we think we're going to move it to 1 month, advertise the heck out of it, and then go from there." And I said, "Cool." At that time, and even still, we're working on different processes that we can align within the organization. I said, "Cool, we'll do the same thing at Latitude." And so Dynamic and West Side saw almost 1,600 applications. We opened the applications for the month of August. So just the month of August, they were open. They saw almost 1,600. It's important to note that they have a pretty robust juniors team that that garnered a lot of applications for them, but also they have two teams, right? West Side and Dynamic, as opposed to Latitude being one. Latitude saw just under 1,000 applications, and so it was a process. I can say immediately about half of them we were on my side. I can't really speak to how Dynamic went through their choices,
yeah,
but
yeah,
on the Latitude side, immediately about half of them for me were cut. That was either because they weren't active PDGA members. I tried to sort people by ratings tiers, and they were in the bottom parts of their ratings tier, or they only played one or two tournaments a year. And
yeah. That's
so
that's that's a big
from
thing
a
for us too. Is
yeah,
like when people
yeah,
apply, they only have one or two events done, or they're really new to the PDGA. Like we want to see some
yeah,
commitment to getting a couple more done.
yeah. And so that was, and so then once I cut those people, I still actually kept a lot of the promising up and comers that they had been playing, or PDGA members, for like 1 or 2 years. Their PDGA rating was going up, but because they had only been playing for 1 or 2 years, like I I don't want to knock on anyone or discourage anyone, but there's a lot of people who play even 20 events in 1 year, and then a half a year later they're done with disc golf, you know. And so those sorts of people, we want to be investing in people who are going to be around for the long haul, because ultimately when we sponsor someone, we don't want to just sponsor them for 1 year. Even if their agreement is for 1 year, we want to be able to renew and nurture that relationship year over year. And so I took over half of my, so I've already split it in half. I'm roughly around 450 people at this point. um I took half of those people and said, hey, you're on the right track. Please consider applying next year, because all of these people have joined the PDGA within the last 2 years. Now, there's a few exceptions to that, namely, like if a player's over 1,000 rated, and like really on the up and coming, like we're going to look at those because they've obviously committed to some extent, and they're showing a lot of quick promise. But that's how I got it whittled down to then my about 225 that I hand went one by one through because of the responses they gave. Now, ultimately, you don't really see any teams in disc golf over 100 people. So 225 applications you can't get to. I so numbers. Discmania has 70 team players. Latitude 64 has 68. Dynamic has just over 70, and Westside has around 40. So just for context on where teams lie, at least within House of Disc, that's sort of the range of where we're at as far as team players go. And so so with that being thought of, you then have to think of, okay, who's on your team existing that's either not coming back, or you're going to need to remove from the team to be able to add people. And so it was a tough decision making process. One of the things that stood out to me this year for Latitude 64 specifically was that we had a significant number of females apply. And one of the things that we're considering internally, it will take us a few years to get to this point, just with what I just mentioned of having people not be on the team anymore. How do we add more people? But there is a path forward where Latitude could potentially have a 50% like women presence and 50% male presence, which would massively like be a massive like uh move away from what the current demographics of the sport are. But there are a significant number of women who are competing now and competing very well. And
Yeah,
so when it comes to our team members that we added this year, we added just under 50% more women to the team than men.
that's awesome.
And so, yeah.
Seth, you're an amazing speaker. I feel like I could have you on every week and we could talk about stuff. Who knows? Maybe that's a different path that we head down. But we spoke the other night on a different podcast, and you mentioned a couple up and coming names for people to look out for in 2024. Tell us about those people.
Yeah. So for Latitude specifically, on the MPO side, Laurie Lettinen is a name that some people know. He's consequently, on the fan survey, the person who had the most fives, which if you dive into like what research tells you on a 1 to 10 scale, it means that a lot of people just don't know who he is. But he's a player from Finland. In Finland, you have mandatory military service, and he
Hmm.
completed his this past year at the beginning of the season, so he only played the second half. But is really set up to go on a tear this year.
Is he
If
coming
you
to the
haven't,
U.S.?
yes, yeah, he'll be here starting during the Texas swing through Portland, and then he'll
Excellent.
be back for all of the majors. So yeah, so two US trips, and then the other player that we have on the MPO side that you might not have heard of, because we have plenty that you have heard of, is Jakub Simrad. He's a Czech player, highest rated player in the Czech Republic, he'll be in the US 3 different times this year,
Wow.
and he is ready to go. He's going to focus, actually, even though he's going to be in the US 3 different times, he's going to focus just as much on the European tour as the US, with his goals of winning, hopefully, the US or the European point series. So yeah.
Are you gonna head to Europe this year?
Hopefully. Last year I spent the entire month of July in Europe. I was able to go to the Tuni, to Schleftia Open. We had a tournament actually in the town where Latitude is based, and then the European Open. And so this year I'm looking at a trip that would hopefully have me at Krokel European Open and the European Disc Golf Festival or the Estonian tournament. And so that's my goal. It might look a little bit different, but that's what I'm looking to do.
Yeah. So if someone is new to Latitude 64 and they've listened to you and they were like, man, this sounds great. What are a couple discs that someone should try from the Latitude 64 lineup?
Yeah, so it really depends on what your arm speed is, what you're looking for in a disc. Latitude is pretty cool in that we have our own, what we refer to as easy to use line. And so these are all discs that are built for beginners, and they're going to be discs that are, you're going to see immediate distance and really usability from. And so that's like the diamond and the sapphire and the ruby. So if you're a beginner, you want to look towards those. I think one of our new releases this year that a lot of people are going to like is the Brave. Every person that has seen how it flies tends to say, hey, I think I'm going to need that in my bag, if they're interested in throwing a Latitude disc. So that's an understable fairway driver. So that would be one to look out. That's a new release coming. And for like any sort of utility disc, we have a great lineup of mid ranges with the Claymore, which is one of Kristen's Tour Series discs, the Trust, which is Albert's Tour Series disc. There, and then the OG, like the Compass, which was Ricky's disc whenever he was on Latitude's team. So yeah, plenty of options. And I think that our content creator, Jonathan, would be remiss if I didn't also say to buy a Fuse. Fuse is a great mid range for any for anyone who plays disc golf. In fact, it was the disc that got me my only birdie last night playing glow doubles.
That,
So yeah.
yeah, that's awesome. The Fuse sells great in the store. Obviously, the Diamond and Jade are two of the easy recommendations for people that are just starting off in disc golf. We've got a giveaway today. We don't have anything physically to show you for those of you watching on YouTube, mainly because I don't have any Latitude 64 in my house. Sorry, boss. But you could win by commenting your favorite trilogy mold. We'll say go old school on this one. Trilogy mold below. And we're going to send you a Latitude 64 disc if you're the person that's randomly selected from Great Lakes disc, or maybe we'll give you some credit to spend it on one of those discs. So comment below. Remember to like and subscribe as well. Maybe even give this one a share. Give Seth the shout out for helping us out with this great episode. Seth, I cannot thank you enough. I'm so excited to do this more in the future. Plan on a mid-season catch-up. Love to hear more about how your team's doing, and maybe even get to meet some of your players as they travel through the Midwest this summer.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes for you and Great Lakes Disc.
Awesome. Thanks again, brother. Have a great rest of your day. Those of you listening or those of you watching, we really appreciate you. I wouldn't do this for no reason. So give us a like, give us a subscribe, give us a share. Have a great day.